Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. Madam Clerk, we have no regrets this evening, and of course, Councillor Palmer is on maternity leave. And Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, there are none. Council, I wonder if two of you would be good enough to move and second resolving into committee of the whole. Councillor Lischina and Councillor Dudek, all in favor, and that carries, and we're now in the relaxed rule structure of our committee of the whole. And the first item is the consent item, or consent items, number 1, number 2, and C1. Number 1 is the holding provision removal for 1187 Burnham Thorpe Road East, and number 2 is the holding provision removal for ASC Oakville Facility Limited. And the confidential consent item is a report on the 297 Queens Avenue LPAT hearing. Councillor Lischina moves the consent items. All those in favor? And the consent items are adopted. That brings us to our first public hearing item, and that's the public meeting report for Silwell Developments Limited, and this is for a zoning bylaw amendment. You, Council, you have your report from the Planning Services Department. The senior planner, Tricia Collingwood, is standing by to summarize your report for the benefit of the public. Trish, we look forward to your summary.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. The purpose of the report tonight is to introduce the planning application for the Silwell Development Ballantree Homes proposal in conjunction with the required statutory public meeting. As noted by my report, there are no decisions to be made at this time, and the report is to be received by council. The subject lands are located in the Uptown Core growth area and have frontage on Oak Park Boulevard, Oak Walk Drive, and Hayes Boulevard. The site is approximately 0.7 hectares in size and has 118 meters of frontage along Oak Park Boulevard. It is currently vacant. The site is part of a larger block that is owned by the applicant and bounded by Millwood Drive to the west. The property is situated on the outer edge and within a very short walking distance to the existing service, commercial, retail, fitness establishments, restaurants, and various other daily services. The Uptown Core has begun to see more mixed use and residential development, and the yellow stars up there show a few of the larger approvals that have happened in the last few years. There are multiple transit stops located adjacent to and within close proximity to the site, providing local as well as GO Transit service. The Uptown Core Transit Terminal, which is the bigger blue T, is within a 5-minute walk and approximately about 450 meters away from the site. As I mentioned earlier, the subject application is the front piece of a larger development concept that the owner has been working on and participating in the town's livable Oakville review with regards to the Uptown Core studies and updates. The applicant is proposing the development of an 8 to 12-story mixed-use apartment building containing 226 dwelling units, 1,089 square meters of retail space, and an urban square fronting onto Oak Park Boulevard. The intent of the application is to amend the site-specific zoning that's in place now to permit the use of bonusing on the southern portion where I've shown the arrow, southern portion of the site where the property is eligible for bonusing, up to 4 additional stories in height, whereas 8 stories is permitted across the rest of the front piece. The applicant is not proposing to change the use permissions or the floor area and permitted locations of specific uses, such as the retail and service commercial uses on the first floor. Minor changes to the zoning provisions with regard to setbacks, first floor heights, and a reduction in the site-specific parking rate are also proposed. An urban park is proposed at the north end of the site. The key focus for development and redevelopment to accommodate intensification within the town is planned for the defined growth areas. The Uptown Core is identified as a growth area in the Livable Oakville Plan. The subject lands are designated urban core, with building heights between 6 and 8 stories for the subject lands, with the bonusing opportunities to accommodate an additional 4 stories of height on the southern portion. I cannot get this. The subject lands are zoned mixed use 4 with a special provision 38. The applicant proposes the following modifications to special provision 38 to permit the development proposal. An increase in the number of stories from 8 to 12 stories on the southern portion of the building, to alter the current yard setbacks when abutting an urban square, and this is consistent with the 2014 mixed-use regs. Alter the minimum height of the first story for non-residential uses, and decrease the residential parking per dwelling unit, and that's inclusive of visitor parking. So the parking's a little bit complicated on this site, and so I put this table together just to show timing starting at 2010, 2014 to the present with regards to what's required in Special Provision 38, what's required in 2014-14, and what's proposed with this application. So you can see the parking rates went from 1.5 from the special provision, and then in 2014-14 they went down to 1.25, which was after the special provision. So the special provision is what's in place now. The 2014-14 just shows you what the mixed use rate is for that use. And what they're proposing is 1.4. And that is inclusive of the visitor, and I break it down by use there. So you can see what they're proposing is less than the special provision 38 and higher than what would be required in a mixed use zone today. Bonusing provisions for the Uptown Core in the Livable Oakville Plan include a pedestrian boardwalk along the west edge of the pond and Memorial Park, a trail system around the ponds and Memorial Park, including a pedestrian bridge crossing, the completion of the Trafalgar Memorial Space, underground public parking, grade-separated pedestrian and cycling facilities over Dundas and/or Trafalgar Road, and transit. Oh, sorry, I just wanted to say that these are provisions that are included in Part E for the Uptown Core, and they speak to what was identified when Livable Oakville was developed, what was identified as priorities in the Uptown. A complete analysis of the applications is well underway and includes a review of the following matters which have been identified to date. Consistency with the provincial policy statement 2014 and the conformity to the 2019 growth plan. Conformity to the region of Halton plan. Conformity with Livable Oakville policies, including the implementation of the bonusing policies. Identification of appropriate public benefits in exchange for height and density, as discussed on the previous slide. Compliance with the Livable by Design guidelines, including scale, massing, and interface with public realms, as well as shadow impacts. Confirmation that the transportation impact study is acceptable with regards to the function of the roadways through the Walmart site today, and the understanding that those roads will function differently in the future. Understanding the function management of the private-public open space, the urban square that I mentioned that's proposed. And justification for the proposed modifications to the special provision, as well as the parent bylaw to implement the proposal. establishment of an appropriate parking standard for residential parking, including the visitors, and Bill 108, implications on the ability to to utilize bonusing provisions as envisioned in livable Oakville. Planning staff will continue to review and analyze the proposed application and address all technical matters as raised, along with submitted public comments, and report to council at a future meeting. In conclusion, staff put forward the following recommendation as shown for council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Collingwood. Council, we have no registered delegations, but I thought I would poll the audience to see if there are any members of the public with information that they would like considered by staff as they continue to evaluate this application. Anyone at all? Don't be shy. We're friendly. All right, I don't see anyone. Council, do any of you have questions? Councillor Grant and Councillor Knoll?
I was just going to say that as of this date, they seem to be matching many of the aspects that we want to do with livable Oakville and the Uptown Core. So I'm willing to move this recommendation at this point.
Thank you very much. Councillor Knoll?
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple questions. You showed us and I'm sorry that we're not seeing it here, so we only got part of. We have a technical problem, so if I missed something on the slide deck, I apologize if I ask a question that was like right there as an answer. But I saw the bonusing list, and that comes under the Uptown Core options for bonusing. I understand that. Has there been any conversation about what the bonusing might look like for this particular project if we were to accommodate their additional stories?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have not entered into the bonusing discussions with the applicant at this time.
Yeah, I kind of thought it might be early, but I was always excited to see what they've got up their sleeves. The second thing is the parking. Obviously, you've heard us speak ad nauseum about parking, and the history of the Uptown Core, and I hope I'm right here, is that originally it was 2 parking spaces. Silwell was very upset, and rightfully so, that they had 2 parking spaces in condos, and they managed to get us to, I think that's where SP, whatever that number came from. But now they want to go down yet again. I'm curious, has there been any justification provided for that? I know that the ultimate goal of reducing dependency on family-owned autos is always important, but have they justified it based on their experiences with their other condos? Because that seems like a big decrease in parking, particularly when everyone around this table is saying more parking, more parking.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, a big decrease in the amount of parking from 2.0 or from 1.5?
I'm thinking decrease from what we already established as being the requirements of the areas. So we're asking for that consideration, provide a justification for seeking that consideration. For example, they've got 2 other buildings already built that basically fall in this category. Now they have the experience with that they call justification. I'm not aware of any surplus parking.
Through you, Mr.
And
Mayor.
I shut off my mic, so.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I will go back and double check what the rates are for the other sites. And I do know in the transportation impact study, they justify the reduction with the walking distance to services, especially.
Right.
And the transit. So they feel that it is an acceptable rate according to that, and I will go back and verify whether it's kind of consistent with what they're finding on their current sites.
I'd be very curious to understand what the rationale is for that, particularly in light of the sensitivity that we've been expressing and some of the issues that we've been experiencing, particularly in the new areas north of Dundas. On the commercial visitor spaces, where are those located? Where are those proposed to be located? Are those underground or surface?
Underground.
And, okay, so that's something I'd want to have an understanding of, is how they're going to be able to provide access to clients to underground parking, like what kind of provisions they would have in place for what would ultimately be a condominium building and security and such. So I'd be curious. And that's probably more of a site plan issue, but certainly because it becomes part of this parking conversation, I'd like to know more about that. Because I know that is a challenge with those units they have, the retail units they have now. Some of those merchants are already expressing concerns about not having adequate parking.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I put this slide back up there because I had totally intended to include a table, and I will do so in the future, that showed with the yellow stars what the parking rates were, where the parking was, with regards to visitor and commercial, whether it's shared, whether it's separate, whether it's underground. Some of the sites aren't built yet, some of them are.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I'm going with this slide, is to look at, you know, what is in the uptown
Okay.
and what they're experiencing.
Okay, and that experience to date is very important for me anyway, going
Yep.
forward in terms of how I'll be looking at this. Is it
Okay.
possible to circulate that slide deck by email or on Diligence so we can actually read it after the fact? Because
Yes.
it looks like you did a lot of great work on it, and I want to
It's a shame
honor
you
that.
can't see it.
Pardon me?
It's a shame you can't see it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. With that, I'm happy to support Councillor Grant's motion to receive this at this time and look forward to the additional information.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Elgar?
Thank you very much. Similar to Councillor Knoll, when you come back with the report, I'm very interested in the ratios we're going after now related to parking. It's becoming a big issue, and I'm wondering whether we're really going the wrong way at this point. But further to that, when I look at your report on page 30, you say there's a total of 279 parking spaces for residential. And when I add it up here, I get 278 on page 39. I'm just trying to understand, did the apartments, and also with apartments on page 30, you mentioned there are 6 townhome units. But then I notice on your 30, page 39, you say there's 10 townhouse units. So I'm trying to figure, is it 6 or 10?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is 10, so I've obviously made a mistake in the report. The 267, I do the same math, and I get the same as you, 266. They've rounded up, even though they could round down. So
So-
they've added an extra space.
So where'd they add it? That's all, I just want to know where did they add it, because I get 278 with your numbers. It's like 266 for the apartments and 12 for the townhouses. So I'm just trying to figure, where did they add it for residential?
In the apartment rate, they
Sorry?
added. In the apartment rate, they add to 267.
So it really should be 267?
Yes.
Okay, and hopefully maybe it'll go up by the time the final report comes. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Knoll?
We're, through your worship, staff are undertaking this parking review right now in North Oakville, correct? Does that include Uptown Core? Okay. When will we be seeing that report as it relates to when we'll be seeing this report again? I'm just curious if we can rely on that for advice when it comes to the ultimate disposition of this report, or this proposal.
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
There we go. The parking management study is looking to come back to council towards the middle of next year.
So this will be back before us, well before then, I imagine.
It looks that way, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Grant?
But there is an entire campus that is being built on that property. And my hope is that, you know, of course, they've not given us any indication of what they're building in the future on the other areas. Well, they've given us some idea, but we would have that report at least by the time we get anything further, so we can mend from there and have them build underground. And in addition, I believe that all the reasons why there was some talk about reduction in parking spaces, because they're literally across the street from a huge empty blacktop. So, all right, thank you.
May I put the vote? Before I do, the motion is that the public meeting report prepared by the Planning Services Department be received, that comments from the public, which in this case is from council, with respect to the proposed amendment submitted by Silwell be received, and that analysis, well, in the report, we already had staff saying that they were going to be considering parking, so we don't have to add anything there. And we can excuse Mr. Simeone from listing parking in addition to parking already being there. And with that, Councilor Grant's already moved the receipt. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is received. We now turn to the public meeting report for the zoning bylaw amendment for Oakville Developments at 550 Kerr Street. This, like the previous one, is the airing of an application along with preliminary thoughts by staff. And the occasion of the meeting is to hear from the public if they have additional issues they want considered beyond what staff have already identified. Our presentation tonight, which summarizes the report that the detailed report that council's already read, is from Paul Barrett, our senior planner. We have 2 registered delegations later, and we will poll the audience to make sure that everyone who wants a say can have it. Mr. Barrett, you're up.
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. This presentation will provide a brief of the public meeting report regarding the zoning bylaw amendment application submitted by Oakville Development 2010 Inc., which can be found on page 49 of tonight's agenda. The subject lands are located on the west side of Kerr Street, north of Spears Road in Upper Kerr Village. The zoning bylaw amendment application proposes to rezone the subject lands from H1, so holding 1, mixed use 3, to a site-specific mixed use 4 zone. The effect of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment would be to permit 3 16-story towers on a 6-story podium comprising of 472 dwelling units with 2,415 square meters. That's about 26,000 square feet of commercial uses at grade, and 624 parking spaces in 6 underground parking levels. As part of the town's official plan review, the land use designations and policies that apply to Kerr Village were studied and reviewed. This review was considered by council in December of 2017, where council adopted Official Plan Amendment 19. This changed the land use designation of the subject lands from urban center to urban core. The urban core designation permits new buildings ranging in heights between 8 stories to 12 stories, and the bonusing policies may allow for up to 4 stories of additional height. That is a total of 16 stories, in exchange for the provision of public benefits. The intent of the zoning bylaw amendment before council tonight is to rezone the lands to a site-specific mixed-use 4 zone to implement OPA 19. That is the urban core designation. The subject lands are also subject to an exception policy, which provides that as part of any development application, development and redevelopment shall be based on a comprehensive development plan which demonstrates the potential full build-out of the lands at the northwest corner of Spears Road and Kerr Street, which are designated urban core. The applicant submitted a block plan which provides for the proposed development of the subject lands in the context of development of other lands which are designated urban core at the northwest corner of Spears and Kerr. The remaining 3 owners of the Upper Kerr Village Plaza have also submitted a different version of a block plan, which is appended to the staff report in Appendix C. Staff intend to hold a landowner coordination meeting in due course to advance a comprehensive development plan for the area using the Livable Oakville framework as approved by council. And of course, the development application before council tonight would simply apply to the area outlined in red on this image. That is 550 Kerr Street. The framework in the Livable Oakville plan includes a complete local road network, appropriate building heights, setbacks, tower separation, evaluation of related shadow impacts, the location and treatment of 2 new planned gateways, as shown on this image, which is at Kerr Street and Spears, and Kerr in the rail line, location of a new urban square and a new urban park, provision of safe setbacks to the rail line, the location of commercial space, including a food store, and other transit supportive considerations. Other matters identified in the staff report to be considered as part of the comprehensive review include the suitability of the land for the intended use, impact and integration of the proposed development on adjoining properties, operation of the site and the existing commercial plaza, urban design, and function of the site, consistency and conformity with applicable provincial, regional, and town policy, and the proposed increase in height and appropriateness of bonusing for this site. I will not go through all of these items line by line. However, I would like to draw your attention to the point that staff's review will include the coordination of growth with available infrastructure, and the proposed design will be reviewed in the existing context, that is with the existing commercial plaza on adjacent lands, and the planned context, including the full build-out of adjacent lands, which includes the Metrolinx project for the Kerr Street grade separation. Since the staff report was prepared, additional public comments have been received from local business owners, which is included in Council's package for review. Public input received to date, including at this meeting, will be included as part of staff's comprehensive review. In conclusion, Your Worship, staff put forth the following recommendation for Council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barrett. Councillor Duddick, you have questions now?
Thank you. I just wanted to commend you for articulating and outlining so many of those concerns, because basically both those sort of negate Councillor Chisholm and myself raising them. I guess the biggest concern I have, and I thank you for identifying it, is the fact that the applicant that we're considering here in the application, they were asked to provide a comprehensive plan for the area. And now the other owners abutting this particular property, because it's dead center, have come forward with their own interpretation or proposal. So you mentioned this meeting that's going to take place. Is there an opportunity for Councillor Chisholm and I to attend that, or at least get apprised of it afterwards in terms of what the end result is? Because we've been very, very anxious about this property for a long time, as you can well imagine, and we want to see it go forward in a comprehensive nature.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we can certainly keep you apprised of those discussions, and any updated block plan or submissions made by the applicant will be posted to the town's website for everybody to view as well.
Councillor Elgar?
Thank you very much. Through you, Mayor Burton. Similar to the last report, I'm just curious on the parking regarding the commercial. Did they split out, or did I just miss the split between commercial and residential? Because I get there is, 1.32 spaces per dwelling unit. I don't know what it was. Does it get better with commercial? I didn't see that. Or is the parking spaces you're saying, is that commercial and residential?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the number that I did quote is commercial and residential. It's a total number.
We don't know the split of what the numbers are then between commercial and residential at this point.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I could provide that to you after the meeting, the split between commercial and residential based on the current plan.
Okay, my question would be similar, it's just that coming back, again, if we could address whether we have enough parking in that area. Although at least it's a little bit closer to a GO train station, that's for sure. It's walking distance. So, it seems like the last application, a little bit north of that, like a long ways. So, are you interested in the parking coming back? Thank you.
Councillor O'Meara?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just interested in how the intersection of needing to sit down with 4 property owners to figure out a plan will intersect with the timelines that we have to have these discussions. I mean, should this not have come before this application came? I'm not sure how that works. I'm wondering if you might be able to just shed some light on that for me.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can shed some light on the timeline. The staff did host a landowners coordination meeting. It was in June of last year, I believe. And that's what the applicant has used to inform their block plan. In terms of the review timeline for the development application in front of council, in the staff report, we did identify that we expect staff's review to take more than the 90 days, which is in the amended Planning Act.
Okay, that's fair enough. Thank you.
Councillor Chisholm.
Through you, Your Worship, the question I have with respect to this proposal coming forward in relation to our development of the grade separation for Kerr Street, what type of impact would this application have bearing on our workings with Metrolinx with their grade separation, and what does that encounter?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a good question, and it's something that staff's identified as a matter to be reviewed through this development application. Metrolinx is the commenting agency on this development application, and I'd imagine they'd be interested in the timelines and how this development could impact that project as well.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I could just add to that. However, I would note that Metrolinx has all the opportunities through their legislation to continue and proceed with the underpass. I think actually they have issued expropriation notices to those landowners on that side, so they have all those mechanisms to proceed regardless of the status of this application.
Maybe this question can't be answered, but with respect to these proposals coming through, it would suggest that would land values be increased because these development proposals are coming through with respect to negotiations with Metrolinx on expropriation?
Hitting the wrong button. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can't specifically comment on land values. I would say, though, that the lands are already subject to an official plan, which it provides for its density requirements already. So that would establish to some extent, I would think, consideration for land value.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Grant.
Thank you. I realize that we're still looking for a traffic impact study, but has there any talk about what we can do for the area to even improve transit? I think there's at least 5 or 6 routes that go through that intersection specifically at Kerr and Spears, and certainly they would take up one entire lane. At this point, those 2 streets, the intersection is very busy, does have a few accidents going on, and it seems unsightly for us to not consider the fact that we need to at least find a way to create an extra lane for transit, or look at different ways of moving traffic through that area, especially if we're looking to put that many more people on the roads.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the coordination of development and infrastructure will be reviewed as part of this application. We can certainly look into transit as well. The plan for this area in livable Oakville is to establish a critical mass of people and coordinate that with additional transit service to the GO station and throughout the town.
And I would add that there was an EA that was done for Kerr Street to identify the underpass, and that information we certainly can, in the report that comes back, provide you with what accommodations were made for cycling and pedestrians in that EA that was undertaken.
And certainly that's fine, and not to seem argumentative, but a critical mass of people is fine, but a critical mass of people also means a critical mass of transit or transportation, and many people do enjoy driving their cars, and given the fact that this is already a blocked up road system, it seems incomprehensible that we were not considering that as we look forward. So, thank you.
Councillor, I thought the staff response was that infrastructure is being considered
Correct.
rather than it wasn't.
However, we are looking at Kerr, certainly. Spears, I know that we've got further down the line, working to expand it, but nevertheless, as long as we keep that in mind. As long as the right hand and the left hand know what they're doing.
As always. Anyway, thank you for your contribution. Madam Clerk, would you call the listed delegations?
The first delegation is Garnet Mason.
Welcome, Mr. Mason. Council looks forward to your information.
Hi. Just, I have a few questions as well, but the main thing that I wanted to address was there was 2 points within the Livable Oakville plan that I had seen that seemed to sort of conflict with this. Some of them have already been addressed by some of the councillors, one of which is the infrastructure. Being the traffic in that area is already quite congested, as you've noticed. I wanted to know what sort of work is being put in to review that and to see how that would be expanded to support such a development, as well as most of you know, the water main in that area was recently upgraded to meet the needs of the townhouses that were put in there, or not the townhouses, the condominiums that were put in there recently, and what infrastructure and other support would need to be put in to support this development. And has that been fully considered or outlined before proceeding with a plan to develop all of this? The second point, as far as that, is that from what I can see here, that some of the plan that was presented was not disclosed fully to me. I didn't see all of that beforehand, but from my understanding with it, it is seeming to be primarily a residential development. And the outline, as far as business outline, isn't clear to say as far as what will be included in that first floor commercial region, whether or not allotments will be made for the existing tenants of the commercial areas that are there now, or whether or not that's sort of going to be pushed off, and what sort of approach they're going to take to help us out as far as the residents that are currently in those areas. The questions that I have, and I'm not sure what the best way to get these answered would be, is more along the lines of what sort of timeline do they have for the current tenants in that region? Whether or not the tenants of their property have a demolition clause in their lease, as some of the other tenants do on the surrounding lands, whereas they would not be able to keep their lease to the end if they do decide to demolish and redevelop that building. The other side of things is whether or not they plan to assist those who are currently in those commercial regions with relocating, as far as any funds and compensation for the money that they have invested into building that business in those areas already, and making this the high-value, high-traffic area that it is today. Additionally, I would like to know about what their plan is with regards to the surrounding property owners and what commitments they've had on that, whether or not it's just discussions or whether they have had any commitments from the surrounding property owners to join together as far as this development. Because as far as I can see with this, the plan that they've submitted, as well as what we've seen, seems to be one that is going to require them all to commit to this and join together, whereas they've alluded to a plan additionally where they could develop on their own, and we have not seen any plan or development that would allow for that on its own, given the need for additional roadways and infrastructure that would be required.
Thank you very much for your questions. As the staff member, the value you've brought to this is you've put in plain language the items that staff said in planner speak are going to be answered in their study of this application. And those items should be all covered in the final recommendation report, which will come sometime in the future. Hard to know how long away that will be.
Okay.
But I think you should think of this as an evolving process. And it's helpful to have your questions, and I thank you for them.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Robert McFarland.
Mr. McFarland, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. My name is Rob McFarland. I'm a planner at Zelinka Priamo. We represent Oakville Developments 2010 Inc. For their property located at 550 Kerr Street, where there's a zoning bylaw amendment proposed as presented by council earlier. We have some repetitive information from staff's presentation, so I'll brief over some of that information. But again, after this presentation, will be available for questions should you have any. Sorry, do we have a presentation available? Perfect. Perfect. There we go. Just a few technical matters. Perfect. There we go. So just as a brief summary, the proposed development is for a 16-story building, 3 towers within that, commercial at grade, and a zoning bylaw amendment has been proposed to facilitate that development, which is the purpose of our meeting here this evening. A zoning bylaw amendment was submitted to town staff with technical studies, some of which are summarized above here. And then for some additional context, which staff have already summarized, on the left here is shown the livable Oakville plan, your official plan, following OPA 19, and then on the right here, we see the zoning bylaw. So just to focus on the official plan here on the left first, we see after OPA 19 that the subject lands are redesignated to an urban core designation. The purpose of this designation is to facilitate growth in this area and for this area to become a mixed-use community. And still focusing on this image on the left here, we see that within the official plan, there's the extension of Shepherd and of St. Augustine through the plaza there. And so our development has considered those extensions as outlined in the official plan. And then again, as staff mentioned, the Kerr Street grade separation undertaken by Metrolinx, again, along Kerr Street, it's going to go underneath the rail line there at the intersection of the northeast of that plaza. And so our application, again, has considered that, and the submissions have reflected that. And then we move over to the right side of the page. The zoning bylaw, effectively, it hasn't caught up with the official plan designation after OPA 19. And the purpose of this zoning bylaw amendment application is effectively to bring the zoning bylaw up to speed. Again, staff provided an overview, and just to reiterate, the subject lands 550 Kerr Street, as highlighted here, they're currently occupied by retail tenants. It's part of a larger retail plaza, might be referred to as the Upper Kerr Village or the Oakville Commons. Currently, the lands are occupied by a Shoppers Drug Mart and a Yisk. And the remainder of the plaza, again, is retail uses currently. Those uses are intended to be redeveloped through the official plan, and so our proposal contemplates the existing uses as retail, as well as the potential future build-out of those lands. As you might know, to the northeast, there's a 22-story building and a smaller tower, about 18 stories, I believe, at the intersection of Kerr and Spears. So that's another context to keep in mind. And beyond this, not pictured above, is Oakville GO Station, which we're in proximity to, again, informing this plan. So shown here is the preliminary site concept plan. It displays the proposed mixed-use building with 16-story towers above a podium base. The podium base is 6 stories. It extends along the frontage, along the Shepherd extension. There is also a single-story retail contemplated, so the proposal effectively steps back to the 6-story podium base. To reiterate, the retail on the east side is one larger tenant potential, and then there's several other tenant potentials along Shepherd Street towards the western block there. The residential uses are contained within floors 2 to 16. Above the 6-story podium base, there's proposed amenity space, a green roof space for residents to occupy. And then in terms of parking, we've outlined in our proposal the separation between unit sizes as well as commercial uses. Our intent is to meet the zoning bylaw in terms of parking. So 60 parking spaces are allocated for commercial uses. All parking is located underground for this proposal, as well as functional loading spaces and other technical matters that are required are all incorporated within the design of the building itself. As you'll note, there's an internal road connection, which I'll touch on in the next slide further, but that's kind of where the internal parking and loading is all located from. And so again, just to reiterate staff's point about comprehensive development, as part of the application, a comprehensive development plan has been submitted in support of our application. Effectively, the intent of this is to show how our proposed development or our client's proposed development would would function in the broader redevelopment of the Upper Kerr Village. It isn't intended to specify how any other landowner should develop or will develop. We don't represent them. It's simply an exercise in conformity. And so should any applications be approved at a future date, that's not going to hold these other landowners to any specific building layout or building height or anything of that matter. They would still have to submit their own applications. And so we just wanted to be clear on the intent of this plan here. And so in terms of conformity, I think what we focused on within our submission is ensuring adequate separation between adjacent properties so that they could develop appropriately as well. But most importantly, I think is this connection through our property to the southerly landowner for them to potentially connect to for redevelopment in the future. So as part of our application, we have a private laneway that extends through the property to facilitate any future connection that might be warranted in that area. So as part of our application, we submit a few concept renderings. I'll just leave these up for a brief moment just so you can have a better sense of scale of what might be anticipated on this property. So as we see, again, as I've discussed, it's 16-story towers above a podium base. I'll just leave these up for a brief moment for your consideration. So in terms of the zoning bylaw amendment that's being requested this evening, right now, as I mentioned, the zoning bylaw isn't up to speed with the official plan in terms of the permissions. So a zoning bylaw amendment would be required to facilitate development in line with the official plan. Specifically, the lands are zoned urban center with a hold, and the proposed zoning bylaw amendment would rezone to an urban core in line with the official plan. There are a few site-specific zoning bylaw zoning provisions, that are being contemplated. Currently, staff are reviewing, and these are subject to refinement. But at a preliminary basis, we're looking at additional height, which would implement the bonusing policies of Section 37 and of the official plan, as well as yard setbacks, and specifically maximum yard setbacks, just so that we can facilitate more of a landscaping treatment along the road frontages for pedestrian use. So as part of this, this planning application and this development in general, our client has undergone extensive public consultation beginning over a year ago. As staff mentioned, we met with staff and with landowners last year. Our first formal pre-consultation meeting was in 2018. We've had another follow-up pre-consultation meeting with staff since that time, so 2 formal pre-consultation meetings. Following that first pre-consultation meeting, we had a landowner coordination meeting, which again, as staff mentioned, was to inform the block plan. And an open house meeting was held before our application as well as after our application to hear any comments that the public might have with relation to our application. It's my understanding that the surrounding landowners are also looking to undertake a similar planning exercise, and so our client has advised us to open the dialogue with that group, and so we've had recent communication with that group, and so that communication line is ongoing. So I just wanted to note that. So just to conclude, in summary, our zoning bylaw amendment is to implement the policies of the official plan, specifically OPA 19. The proposed redevelopment is in line with the policies of the official plan for comprehensive redevelopment. We've considered adjacent landowners as well as other external factors, including the grade separation, as well as the extension of Shepherd and of St. Augustine. And a future site plan application process can work through any site-specific design matters that might come up through discussions with staff and any other parties. So that concludes our presentation. There are members of our consultant team here. Greg Priamo is here as well. Steve Barrell is here from our architectural team, and the owner is also here. So if you have any questions, we are available following this presentation.
Thank you very much, and a masterful piece of timing considering our 10-minute limit. You raise a question, perhaps you didn't mean to, and I may have misunderstood you, but I took you to say that I took you to be reminding us that zoning has to conform upward to the official plan, and we all know and accept that. But then you made an aside, I think. Anyway, you made a remark to the effect that there were a few other little considerations that might be outside of that or in addition to that. Do you want to, first off, is that what you meant? And if you did, would you like to list those for us so that we have an idea of what that list looks like?
Sure. So through your worship, at a preliminary basis, we've submitted an application that staff are currently reviewing. And so as part of that application, we proposed 16-story heights, which the zoning bylaw, if we were to go to the MU4, would only permit 12. So to achieve bonusing, you'd need a site-specific provision to get up to the 16 stories. So that's one of those. And as well, there's maximum setbacks that are established. And as part of our proposal, we're proposing enhanced streetscaping. So we're considering an extension of that maximum setback requirement to allow for some landscaping treatments on adjacent roadways. So that's the extent currently. Again, the proposal that's before you is subject to staff's review, and to address comments, there might be changes. So I can't confirm what the final thing will be in front of you, but that's where we are right now.
All right, thank you very much for your explanation. I'm going to turn the floor over to Councillor Duddick with questions for you.
Pardon me. Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the delegate. The plan, the comprehensive plan that you came back with, that was one that the applicant proposed, just as you sort of had a placeholder in order to allow development to take place, not necessarily what takes place on their lands, but just to provide for sufficient development. Out of interest, the roads that I see there, is any of your land given up to roads? And if so, how much?
Certainly. So if we look in through your worship, if we look at the plan above, we see generally in the jotted red lines here that along Kerr Street, to allocate for that grade separation, that portion is being taken for that purpose. And then again, for Shepherd Road, we see the jotted line continue up, and that's part of the first taking, I believe. And then beyond that, Shepherd Road will extend through our property there. And so it's been contemplated through our site plan here.
I guess and again, this will be addressed obviously at this meeting that will take place, but you can understand from the other owner's perspective that given other things that are taking place in the area, they want to be able to maximize the investment of their property as well, similar to what your applicant is considering as well. So I just wanted to make sure there was some parity in regards to who was giving up the majority of their land in order to incorporate these streets that you were making reference. So look forward to hearing more. Thank you.
Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel.
Thank you for your presentation. Early on in your presentation, you left me with the impression that you've designed this and the other landowners can certainly, their projects could work around this. And then later on, you talked about the dialogue, and there's a dialogue, ongoing dialogue. One of my concerns, and I guess my question is, are you committed to a coordinated development of this site, or are you, or is that just, we'll talk about what you want to do, but this is our plan? Because clearly, from a residential perspective and a complete community perspective, a coordinated site is critical.
Certainly, through your worship, our client has directed us to commit to work with the adjacent landowners, and as I mentioned, we met previously, or there was an invitation extended to meet previously to inform this block concept site plan. And in our interpretation of the comprehensive plan, what we're working around are two main features, which are the extension of the public roads. And so through that process, it's our understanding and our direction forward to accommodate for those extensions, while also ensuring that the surrounding lands are able to develop. And so the adjacent landowners would have to undertake a similar exercise in comprehensive planning, and they would have to, as part of their application, submit a block concept plan. So we're committed to working with the adjacent landowners, but in our submission, our application doesn't necessarily fit in to the our application doesn't have to fit into this puzzle piece, but it is part of the puzzle piece that, sorry, I'm just getting mixed up. It is part of this puzzle piece that we facilitate the full picture with this road connection. And so this road connection is the key part that we're ensuring that development can proceed appropriately.
Thank you.
Councillor Duddeck?
I wonder if I could just ask a follow-up question, and that is pertaining to the rear of your property. There's currently a strip plaza that goes along there, and of course the cinema and other things in a large parking lot. That is not incorporated in this development. That's a separate landowner. Is that correct?
Through your worship, that landowner is part of the development group. And so as part of this plan, their lands have been incorporated within that. So their lands have been incorporated within this block concept plan here.
The reason for the question is when you see the road tying up to St. Augustine, obviously that has to incorporate that property to the rear. And the way my understanding was there was a strip there and then there's owners going off the other way facing towards Kerr. So you're telling me the owner to the rear has participated in this process or is on board?
Through your worship, I can't comment if any landowners are on board with this process or anything on behalf of them. I can tell you that an invitation was extended to that landowner, and as part of our application, we've proposed an interim and an ultimate condition, in which case, regardless of any other landowner participation, our lands are functional. And so our lands aren't dependent on that landowner coming forward for redevelopment.
Okay, I appreciate that. I guess when you reference group, it's somewhat confusing because for some of us, we're thinking the group of the landowners that are facing towards Kerr and abutting along Spears. Now you're talking to an owner to the rear of your property that you've obviously contacted but may or may not want to participate. Is that the correct understanding?
Through your worship, that would be correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So on the strength of this disclosure, of which Councillor Knoll had no awareness before it was given, he is declaring a conflict in that he is the CEO of a business that occupies land at 171 Spears Road. And so,
Can I speak to that for 1 second?
yes, you certainly may.
Your worship, thank you for reading my declaration. So to be clear, I am declaring this declaration of pecuniary interest at this time. We'll see how the thing evolves as to whether or not that might change. But I just want to reemphasize what you just said. I was totally unaware that that slide existed. To my knowledge, up to this point, this was strictly the property on Kerr Street and had nothing to do with my property. And now suddenly I see my property's been involved. So I have to remain outside of the discussion on this matter.
Out of an abundance of caution.
Out of an abundance of caution. Thank you.
So that's very well. Thank you very much, Mr. McFarland. We appreciated your information. And members of the public, anyone in the public with information for council to ask staff to consider in their evaluation of the project, would you please let us know? Anyone at all? All right, thank you. Council, we need a mover for the motion that the public meeting report be received and that the comments from council be received. I didn't hear any new issues that Mr. Barrett didn't identify already, so I don't think we need to add any. Councillor Grant?
I believe that Councillor Chisholm, and given that it's his ward, I will allow him to move it, but I'd just like a copy of that slide deck, just so we can see. We haven't had a chance to see, again, anything tonight. It'd be good to just get all of the slides so that we can examine it in properly.
Yes, Councillor. Councillor Chisholm? Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and the information is received. All right, Council, the next item is item number 5, the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy Implementation for Ercles Estate. And in light of the correspondence received from legal counsel for Club Link regarding item 5, I would ask that Council consider deferring clauses 3, 4, and 5 regarding the official plan and zoning amendments and receive the presentation from Ms. Schappert regarding clauses 1 and 2 regarding the designation and conservation plan for Eckler's Estate. And I say that now so that after we hear from Ms. Shepherd, I don't surprise you with that or forget. So, Councillor Chisholm.
I'd be happy to make a motion, Your Worship.
Well, thank you, but I still have a presentation available for you from Ms. Shepherd, which I think the public would be interested in. Ms. Shepherd, you are up.
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. So I will be here to talk about that first part of this title slide, the Ercles Estate Heritage Designation and the Conservation Plan. So, I'm sure everybody on council is familiar with the Ercles Estate, but this is just an aerial view to remind you of the cultural heritage landscape that was considered by council several months ago before issuing a notice of intention to designate for the cultural heritage landscape of this property. And so it includes the Ercles building, the Customs House, both of which together form the home of the Oakville Museum today. It also includes the cottages, which are the homes of the Oakville Historical Society, and the Coach House building, which is located just to the east of the cottages. It also includes a number of very interesting landscape features, including 1920s rock garden designed by Dunnington Grubb and Stenson. And so what we're here tonight is to implement further parts of Phase 3 of the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy. And so as council has issued a notice of intention to designate for the property, and we received no objections to that designation, the objection period closing on October 15th. We are here with a designation bylaw for you to consider tonight, as well as a conservation plan for the cultural heritage landscape. So on September 9th, council approved the notice of intention to designate for the Ercles property. That objection period has expired, and we are here with bylaw 2019-057 for council's consideration this evening. In association with the heritage designation, staff have also prepared a cultural heritage landscape conservation plan, which will be used to help guide and manage change on the cultural heritage landscape of this property. This is a document that was completed in-house by heritage planning staff. I'd like to recognize Elaine Eigel, who put a tremendous amount of work into drafting the conservation plan, but also the hard work of other town departments who worked very cooperatively with us, including the Oakville Museum and Parks and Open Space, as well as other town stakeholders, including the Oakville Historical Society as well, who have all helped guide and review this draft conservation plan that's before you tonight. So the conservation plan does guide alterations or changes that are proposed to be made to the property in the future that are likely to affect its cultural heritage value or interest and or its heritage attributes. And the plan is really in place to help to ensure that all of those things are retained and protected. The conservation plan is a pretty detailed document. It's included in your package, in the addendum package this evening, with lots of lovely photos. The two things I think that I'd really point out for the conservation plan is that it's designed to be a tool that is used not only by heritage planning staff, the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee and Council, but also the project stakeholders, whoever they may be, whether they be from the museum or the Historical Society or facilities and construction management. And so we've provided different categories of alterations. The first category, A, alterations are completely exempt from heritage permit approval. And so providing that list gives people the assurance that they can go ahead and do those actions without needing to come to us for any type of permission. And then there's two categories of alterations that would require a heritage permit. Category B alterations, which are considered relatively minor in nature and go to the Director of Planning Services for approval. And Category C alterations, which require the feedback of the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee and then approval by Planning and Development Council. The conservation plan also describes how the heritage permit application process works, and it provides the direction to manage future changes to the property while conserving the cultural heritage value of the cultural heritage landscape. And so if we are only dealing with the first two recommendations in the staff report, I will just close, I guess, with this slide and a summary of the two recommendations. The first being that bylaw 2019-057 to designate the Ercles estate be passed, and two, that the draft cultural heritage landscape conservation plan for the Ercles estate be approved. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Shopper. Councillor Dudek?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for the presentation. And as you had indicated, the tremendous amount of work that went into this document and bylaw per se. And I share this for the sake of committee members other than Councillor Giddings and myself who serve on Heritage Oakville. From what I recall, there were no concerns raised as they pertain to the heritage matters on this particular bylaw by the committee. In other words, there wasn't dialogue back and forth about whether or not this bylaw had merit. Is that correct?
Through you, Your Worship, staff received no additional feedback from the Heritage Committee that there were any changes that should be made to the Heritage Designation Bylaw or the Conservation Plan. The committee seemed quite satisfied.
Okay. But there was a letter that was submitted to the committee by somebody who delegated, and it's referenced in a letter we've received this evening. And I just want to reinforce that I believe the chair at that time had indicated the delegate was not providing heritage information pertaining to the bylaw, but rather a process, save and accept what our Oakville Heritage Committee were dealing with on that day. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, I believe so.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors? Are there members of the public with information for council on the recommendation? All right, council, it's moved by Councillor, this is the motion by Councillor Chisholm, that, that we adopt clauses 1 and 2 of the staff recommendation as printed and defer clauses 3, 4, and 5. May I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that carries. Thank you very much, everybody. That brings us to item number 6, which is the recommendation report and draft plan of condominium for 332, 338 Robinson Street. We have a presentation from Lee Musson, the senior planner, if required. Councillor Haslett-Deal.
I'd be pleased to move it if my fellow councillors don't require the report.
Thank you, Councillor. Council? You got it. Are there members of the public with information for council on this matter? The recommendation is moved by Councillor Haslett-Deal. May I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Thank you, everybody. That brings us to item number 7, which is the recommendation report for the draft plan of condominium for the addresses between 3058 and 3087 6th line. And we have a presentation from Brandon Hassan, the planner, if required. I have no notice of registered delegations. Council, what is your pleasure? Councillor Sanju.
Mayor Britton, I do not require the report, but I do have a quick question, and then I'd be happy to move. Ready? I don't see a significant change between what we were given before and what we have presented today. I just wanted to make sure that there was no material change in the frontage or the current construction that's already taking place.
No, through your worship, there has been no change since the previously approved site plan applications.
Excellent. That's all I have. I'd be happy to move, Mayor.
Are there members of the public with information for council on this matter? Seeing none, the item is moved by Councillor Sanju. May I put the vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that carries. Thank you, everybody. We now turn to item number 8, which is the options for street lighting on Lakeshore Road West in Kerr Village. We have a presentation from Christina Tizard, and she is the manager of urban design. I'm not aware of any registered delegations, but we will poll the audience. I do see a possibly interested party at the meeting. Ms. Tizard, you have the floor, and we're all ears.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I just have a brief presentation this evening. It's item 8, pages 103 to 110 in tonight's agenda. And just wanted to respond to a question that was asked of council to report back by staff related to lighting on Lakeshore Road. So at the end of 2017, and I believe it was brought forward when there was an agenda item related to the downtown streetscape revitalization project. And the question was to take a look at Lakeshore Road West within the Kerr Village district and ways to, or opportunities to enhance street lighting. And looking for options to potentially retrofit some of the light fixtures that were coming out of downtown, as well as to look at some cost-sharing options. And the understanding is that there was a goal for a continuous streetscape along Lakeshore Road West through Kerr Village and then on into the downtown. So staff met with ward councillors back early this year, and we were able to respond to the question about the reuse or use of some of the retrofitted fixtures that were coming out of downtown. And we identified that that was not an option. First, that the fixtures that are in the downtown along Lakeshore Road will be repurposed and reused within the downtown district as needed, as the new replica lights are going in to the downtown. And we also identified the intent to differentiate between the districts, and so that there was an opportunity to look at a different type of lighting standard to differentiate between Kerr Street and the downtown. We also spoke a bit about cost sharing and spoke a bit about looking for some local partners and other funding opportunities, and the section 37 monies from the RAIN condominiums was part of that conversation. We were also able to provide the ward councillors with an update on some of the policy, design direction, and projects that have been happening in the immediate area since the question was posed and that meeting, such as an official plan amendment for Kerr Village related to some of the policy improvements, and an implementing urban design document that certainly speaks to supporting enhancements in the streetscape. We talked a bit as well about the Kerr Underpass project, and that last summer there was extensive public consultation that was undertaken to select streetscape furnishings that would be placed within the underpass project area, so north of Spears along Kerr to just under the rail overpass. And certainly through that process there was an intent and messaging out to the public that the selection of furnishings being made during this particular process would in future be implemented along the balance of Kerr Street all the way down to Lakeshore Road and along Lakeshore. So a way to bring together the various components of Kerr Street, the north, the middle, and the Lakeshore Road through tying together elements such as streetscape enhancements. We also spoke a little bit about the Scenic Corridor initiative that was being launched, as well as some other funding that has been provided through the province, through AMO, to assist with some physical improvements, such as some streetscape elements within the Kerr district. So based on what we were able to report back, we identified the need to move forward and to start identifying and assessing some of those options. And so from there, we looked at some of the things that we know and identified some of the areas where we need to gather some additional information in order to bring forward some solid, constructive options for lighting along Lakeshore. So we do know that the road and boulevard reconstruction is not required, unlike the initiative that is currently going on downtown, so that any works would be restricted to the boulevard itself and not into the roadway. We also know that we have new light poles and fixtures that were selected. While they're a different style and height, they do provide improvements to lighting, both for drivers, pedestrians, cyclists. And they do require different spacing. So it's not a one-for-one replacement, but that the spacing may be a bit different to ensure that we have even light distribution. So we have those components in place, but what we really need to know is the condition and the capacity of the existing infrastructure, and whether or not that can support new poles and fixtures. Through that, we also want to understand, or need to understand, the extent of the disruption of the boulevard. Is it simply where the light standards are currently now, or is it a bit larger than that? Are there conflicts with other utilities? It's all the things that are happening underground that we can't see and we need to understand. And also, hopefully through this, we'll understand some project timing and some costs. So coming out of this what we need to know list, we are recommending that a consultant is retained to assist staff in assessing the condition and to help us define that scope of work. It's also given that the nature and the scope of work, we're looking at what those implementation requirements might be, some of the potential impacts and challenges. I think staff will also be able to identify some of the synergies given some of the projects we're also working on, looking at phasing, options, and ultimately costs. So through this report this evening, we are making a recommendation that, that requests for funds to undertake the assessment of the project area be referred to the 2020 Budget Committee. And our third recommendation is that should that project be funded, we will engage a consultant and report back with options, phasing, costing, et cetera, as per the original request for report. And I also have just in my back pocket here. So this, the project area, so I don't know if, there we go, I've got some mouse action here. So this is the Kerr district. So at the northern end, we have the Metrolinx town partnership in terms of the underpass project. We have the balance of Kerr Street, so from Spears all the way down to Lakeshore. And we have Lakeshore Road West going from Forsyth over to Maurice. Now, while the question was focused more on Lakeshore Road, we wanted to put on the table as well the fact that while we're doing this investigative work, that we may want to look at Kerr Street as well, so that we will have that information in hand. And that's why in the staff report, we're making a recommendation of upwards of $100,000 in terms of the potential funds required for a consultant. And also as a reminder, this is the luminaire that was selected for the north part of Kerr Street for the Metrolinx underpass project, and just two images of the current lighting standard, the Cobra head on Lakeshore Road, and that's the image to the far left. And then in the center there, that's the coach style light standard currently on Kerr Street. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It sounds like a work opportunity for the Budget Committee, if I ever heard one. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. I'm reading the report, and I guess what the ultimate goal here is my colleague, Councillor Dudek, and myself, what's triggering this is the underpass the grade separation underpass development with the new light standards and poles. Right now, as we see it, we have three pieces. We got to have new to Spears Road, then the old or existing down to Lakeshore, and from Forster to Maurice are those tall, what I call highway lights. Foresight, thank you, Foresight. The reality of it is, what we're looking for is consistency through, and I think there's some opportunities here why we're being triggered with the new development that we can run this through, because in your report, I totally agree with the consistency is important, and it will be an improvement for the Kerr Street Village whole commercial area with respect to that. And I am happy with this, but we need to move forward on it because there's some opportunities there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Councillor Elgar.
Thanks for the presentation, and I agree with what they're saying about consistency, but my question would be, do we not have adequate staff with the technical knowledge to be able to do the work instead of hiring another consultant from a budget point of view? Like, is there a do we have a staffing issue, or we just don't have the expertise? but it doesn't seem that it would be that complicated.
Through you, Your Worship, we did meet with a variety of different internal departments in pulling the What We Know list together. And it was from those discussions that it was, I think, given the nature of the investigations and timing, that it was best to be handled by a consultant. We didn't have the capacity.
I hear you. I'm just concerned, like, I think, and whatever we can do to tighten our budget, to use our own people rather than hiring consultants, I think we could get a big bang for the buck going forward to the degree we can. So if you think about that, thank you.
Councillor Dudek.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. I guess I have a little bit of a concern, and it might be a miscommunication on our part. The original ask for the Kerr Village BIA was that they wanted to have a consistent Lakeshore Road lighting similar to what downtown Oakville has, so that we don't have this stop at the bridge and you're going to another whole series of lighting. So while I can appreciate consistency, different aspects of Kerr are different than others. In other words, Lakeshore is almost treated differently than the spine going up Kerr Street. And so while I can appreciate maybe the lights coming from the underpass being incorporated, I think more the Lakeshore Road was the issue, and I don't know if I'm totally out in left field. So I guess I'm kind of worried that we are spending money that we really don't need to in terms of addressing the bigger issue. And so I think our original ask was, if I'm not mistaken, was Lakeshore and reusing those lights. And now we've gone from that to something else. If it's a matter of money, let's just stick with Lakeshore and entertain something at a later date. But I agree that the Budget Committee's got a lot of work in terms of budgetary concerns. And it was, again, a cost sharing. It was supposed to be between the town, the BIA, and hopefully to be able to secure funds from a development that occurs in the immediate area so we could have that sort of offset. So I'll only put that out for, comments.
Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. I'm in agreement with my colleague. However, with discussions with the Kerr Street Village BIA, knowing full well through the bonusing opportunities that have happened in Kerr Street, those funds could be considered for something relative to the downtown or the Kerr Street downtown area. Councillor Dudek is absolutely right with Lakeshore. That was the original intent. But as other discussions with the triggering of Metrolinks with the development and consistency going down Kerr Street with the possibility of using the funding through the bonusing that is in, I guess would be reserves, that was something that we're looking at in consideration. And I just leave it as that. Thank you.
Councillor Adams?
You looked at me like you were worried. I just wanted to add, so some very good conversation about what we're asking for and what we're getting. The $100,000 figure that's being put out there for the assessment, is there an ability to separate that between an assessment of the Lakeshore area and an assessment of the Kerr Street area? That's my first question.
Through your worship, yes, we can certainly get back to you with a split.
So it would be possible to consider whether we want to do the whole thing or part of the thing. Mm-hmm. And the other question I have for you is there any kind of estimate at a very high level of what the cost of doing some kind of work would be? So if the assessment is $100,000, is the conceptual work that might be undertaken after that, is that $1 million? Is that $2 million? Is it $500,000? What kind of workload are we expecting to come out of an assessment process like this?
Certainly the cost for implementation would be identified through this assessment process. So at this point in time, We are, based on our knowns, we know how many light standards we would need. We don't know what kind of infrastructure improvements or overhaul we would need. So there would be a separate request for funds coming forward in the future. And at this point in time, we don't have a dollar or an estimate.
So there's an underlying question there about if you go through an assessment process, it then creates an expectation for the spend of some additional capital dollars for which we, A, don't have a source of funding, and B, we don't really have an idea of what that is.
That's correct.
Okay. And we don't yet have a source of funding for this, even the assessment.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Council, I would like to get to the bottom of what the BIA wants. Councillor Chisholm, you sit on the BIA, is that correct? I noticed that there was some daylight between your statement and your colleague's statement in terms of the objective being the entire BIA area versus just the lakeshore area, and the divergence that happened between replicating lakeshore and having a novel or unique look for the Kerr area. Given that, well, so first, does the BIA have a position on that question?
Executive Director is in attendance, and maybe you can answer that question.
All righty then. Doug, would you be good enough to delegate? How many people get asked to delegate?
Not very many.
Mr. Sams, we thank you for being here, and can you give us any clarity on what is in fact desired by the BIA?
Well, through your worship, originally with the grand opening of the 16-mile Creek Bridge, there was discussion, Councillor Duddick was on our board at the time, and there was discussion about having some conformity because street lamps are a lot better looking than the Cobra poles. And I think what's happened, and that was the original ask of the report coming to council. I think what has happened in the meantime, then the underpass project took off, and there were some enhancements that were going to happen from the underpass up to Spears. And so then it was brought up, we had a change of counselors, Councilor Chisholm come on, and we have a great urban design manager, by the way. And, there was some discussion about how could we, when you have development, how can you maximize your opportunity to have attractive beautification, streetscaping improvements. And so then that's where that came in. And so then the discussion further evolved from the underpass project to Spears. Why don't we take it on down to Kerr Street? And then you also have the widening of Spears Road. So you'd like some conformity because you are going to have transit traffic. You are going to have pedestrian traffic. I would not be opposed to going back to our urban design manager and coming up, and maybe with Councillor Duddick and Councillor Chisholm, is coming up with a plan because there is some bonusing money out there for us. We have a plan to spend some that we got from the province. So I think we take it back and look at that if we can't do it without hiring a consultant for $100,000.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Sams? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate the clarity you have provided. Council, I believe that you may want to defer the entire matter so that more discussions between the ward councillors and the BIA could take place. Is one of you interested in moving deferral? Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. All in favor? And that is deferred. Thank you, everybody. Council, the next item is item 9, the site plan process update. And you have a report that's quite detailed. Councillor Grant.
Having been a longtime member of the Site Plan Committee and having a lengthy conversation with staff, I agree with the efficiencies in item 9 and we'll move it.
Thank you. Councillor Ilger?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. I like where we're going. I just have a concern, and I'm wondering whether going forward, whether staff could give councillors in the ward a heads up of what will be approved at by the site plan director, so if they have any questions, it can be addressed. I can't see anything negative about it. In fact, I think it'd be good. We might be able to ward off some issues later on, at least as a counselor. So wondering whether staff could work that into their plan.
Mr. Charles would be pleased to field that question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the councillor. In terms of the way that we are continuing to update our process, we would certainly make sure that council is aware of those applications that are in the various wards and continue to post that information online. So the intent being that when applications come in, councillors have the ability to see that. They're able to send us those comments right away when they do get the applications immediately. And that way we're able to take those comments and work those into the overall review that we're conducting. In terms of providing council with another notice prior to the approval, we can do that if council sees the benefit to doing that, but where we see the advantage is council seeing the applications right up front and being able to provide us any comment at that time.
Well, I hear where you're going, and that's when it first comes in, but if you, later on, just before it gets approved, if you notice something different, I'll give you an example. It'd be my tree protection guards that I keep notice not being put in lots of times with site plan. So just a heads up, even in my own ward, that this is what we're looking at approving, and at the final, you can say, hey, wait a minute, this one little thing can we do just before it gets put in place. Just to, you know, and it doesn't have to be in the other wards if they don't want it, but just for the Ward 4 Peter and I share, might solve a lot of problems.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haslet-Deal.
Thank you for the recommendation, and I can support it after having sat on site plan for this year. However, I do support what Councillor Algar is saying, that you do a lot of great work working through issues around site plan, and it's articulated in here. There's a technical elements that you're adjusting and working with the applicant on. If we don't see that final product before it's approved, we'll get surprised. And I think that there's something to be said for a notification that just says this is the final site plan for this development in your neighborhood, so we're not surprised.
Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. And again, this comes primarily from the commercial aspect in terms of what I've heard, and I'm just wondering if we're still going to be working on these elements. Some of the commercial projects that have been, brought to my attention, and I shouldn't need to be brought to the attention on these, is just the need for consistency in what is being asked out of a site plan, and for the need of predictability as well. So are we going to be internally still continuing to work on the process of site plan, even though it's just going to be approved at a director's level?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as council may know, through the Planet program, we are doing a review of a number of our processes, including site plan. So there's various components of the site plan process that we are looking at, so that we are ensuring that the customer does have that predictability from a timing point of view, from an efficiency point of view, that the outcomes overall are more predictable, not just for applicants, but also for staff as well. We are continuing to review that. As we get a little farther through that overall review process, we will be bringing back information for council if that means that we have to tweak the bylaw yet again. And in response to the other councillor's query, I appreciate the advice that you're offering, and it's certainly something that we can look at. What I'd like to be able to do is take that back to our managers and our planners, just to ensure that we can iron out that process, so council does get that advance notice prior to the director approving or refusing plans for that matter.
I appreciate that, and sorry, I'm not sure if your microphone was on, but it was hard to hear you. I appreciate that. The one thing that I would ask then is just when it comes to circulation and when it comes to multiple recirculations from the applicant, I've heard a lot of, all of a sudden new things are being brought to the table at the third circulation, or a different urban planner is looking at the application as opposed to the last urban planner, and they've decided that there should be, and frustration continues to abound. So when we see stuff, we get it at the end when that. But by that time, we've sort of lost our hands on it because staff are going to be dealing with it. So as long as we're continuing to reform and to make those changes, I think it's important to just be consistent with that. So I appreciate that and the commitment to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Council, I would recommend, based on what I've heard, that we add a third item to the motion that's before you. May I read it to you slowly? Very slowly. That council be copied, item 3, that council be copied on final site plan proposals before director approval.
Perfect.
Never let it be said, I don't listen to you. Now, somebody said they wanted to move that. Councillor Grant it was. May I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that carries. Thank you, everybody. Now, Council, item 12 is a report not previously listed from Community Services on the rehabilitation of Town Square. And Commissioner Closey and Commissioner Bell are available if you have any questions. Are there any questions? Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the report and understand the complexity that we're going to be going through on this. Just curious, I know that the rehab project is going to be retendered in the future once all of the underground infrastructure issues are known. Just wondering when that work will commence in terms of, and what's involved in trying to find the issues.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The work first is looking and working with the region as well as our stormwater pieces to really understand what are the issues, and then of the issues that we identify, finding solutions to them. So I would expect that we're working on that now. We'll be working through the region. Early in the 2020, we'll have an understanding of the complexity and the solutions. So then we can start to re-look at what is the work involved with the town square. At that same time, we need to have further discussions, I think, with the merchants, certainly around town square, as well as the BIA and the merchants in the area, just to understand what's the best time for construction. There was a lot of dialogue through the consultation on town square on when is the best time to have the construction so that it has mitigates to the greatest extent the impact to the businesses. So we'd have that discussion with them so that at that point in time we could identify when a job could start, and we'll backtrack from there to make sure the tender gets out in enough time to be able to do that.
Thank you very much for that. I guess we don't know what we don't know until they get in there and start looking how complex, how long a project it'll be, correct?
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Giddings, I wonder if you'd give us the motion to receive the report.
Oh, I thought I'd said that, by all means.
Oh, thank you, sir. All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's received. Item 13 is the noise exemption related to property standards emergency order on 5862 Shepherd Road. Jim Barry, the Director of Municipal Enforcement, is available for any questions. It's pretty cut and dried, in my opinion. Councillor Chisholm? Thank you. Councillor Chisholm is moving that the noise exemption request in the application set out in Appendix A to this report from Municipal Enforcement Services dated October 31st relating to the carrying out of work to satisfy any emergency property standard orders for remediation of structural concerns for the shoring at 5862 Shepherd Road be approved. May I put the vote? Councillor Knoll has a question.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just, my question is with respect to considerations B, financial. I mean, obviously there will be costs associated with this, and it says that those can be collected like taxes from the property owner, I'm assuming with a charge on the property. But I'm curious if the receivership has any implications on that, whether or not we're secure.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, the receivership definitely has impacts on that. We are, will be before the bankruptcy court to seek leave from the receiver's order so that we can collect that money.
So we're not by statute allowed to, or we're not considered a secured creditor, in other words, is that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the issue is once the property went into receivership, everything was frozen, including our actions. So until we seek leave from the bankruptcy court, we can't continue on with the actual prescribed action under the Building Code Act.
And when is that process going to start?
Bankruptcy court, our lawyers will be appearing tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Oh, well done. Very quick. Thank you.
Councillor Adams.
I have the most minor of all things, and that is that the last name and first name of the property owner are reversed on the application. Could our staff fix that as part of our approval, please?
The clerk will adjust it. We have a bylaw authorizing the clerk to fix typos.
Very good. Well, only in as much as it's an application, and we might be chasing after them, so.
Thank you for having such an eagle eye. May I put the vote? All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you, everybody. All right, now we come to confidential discussion item C2, the LPAT hearing report on the Dunbar Developments matter at 1020 to 1042 6th line, and I'm looking for a motion to receive the report. Councillor Knoll, may I put the vote? All in favor? And that is received. Now, Council, we have a confidential report from the legal department updating us on the Glen Abbey matter. And the report is to be received. Do you need to go into camera on this matter, or are you prepared to receive the report? Councillor Ilger.
I'd like to go in camera.
Well, then perhaps you would favor us with the following motion. That committee, because we're in committee, resolve into a closed meeting session for the purpose of dealing with a matter pertaining to litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and receiving advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, with respect to item C3. I do. May I put the vote? All in favor? And that is carried. And we will now resolve into a session closed to the public for the aforementioned reasons. Would council like a 2-minute bio break while we secure the chamber for a closed meeting? We are in recess. All right, council, to the public, I report that the committee has resolved into a closed meeting session for the purpose of dealing with a matter pertaining to litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and receiving advice that's subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, with respect to item C3, which is the confidential report from the legal department on the Glen Abbey matter. And while we were in camera, council passed the motion to extend the meeting past the hour of 10 o'clock so that we could complete the rest of the agenda, which I'm now going to invite us to turn our attention to. Oh, yes, thank you. And at this time, perhaps a councillor would like to move that the report from the legal department dated October 30th be received. Councillor Longo, thank you. All those in favor? Received. That brings us to the advisory committee minutes. First, you have the Livable Oakville Council Subcommittee, and we need a mover that the minutes of the Council Subcommittee meeting of October 7th be received. Councillor Knoll, thank you. All in favor? That's received. Thank you. Now we have the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee, and here we have a little more complex bunch of work. First is that the recommendations pertaining to items 6A and 6B of the Heritage Advisory Committee minutes from its meeting on October 22nd be approved, and the rest is that the remainder of the minutes be received. Councillor Giddings moves that. All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is carried. Thank you, everybody. Now, that means that we now need a motion to rise and report to council. Councillor Longo, all in favor? And that's carried. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on consent items 1 and 2, confidential consent item C1, public hearing items 3 and 4, discussion items 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, and 13, confidential discussion items C2 and C3, and advisory committee minutes, items 10 and 11, as noted by the clerk. Is there a mover and seconder for my report? Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Sanju, thank you. All in favor? Opposed, if any? The report is adopted. Is there new business of an emergency, congratulatory, or condolence nature? Thank you, everyone. A mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws. Councillor Longo and Councillor Robertson. So this is for the bylaws as listed in the agenda, except for, what are we doing about this one? Because
These two won't get passed.
okay, so council, we're deleting from the list of bylaws to be approved here 107 and 108 because we deferred those matters. All in favor? Opposed, if any? The bylaws are adopted. Thank you very much for your time and attention and your many contributions. It's been great working with you, and we are adjourned.